Syberia was originally a 2002 point-and-click adventure game released on the PC and Xbox, the PlayStation 2 in Europe, and later for the Nintendo DS handheld. Conceived by Benoit Socal and developed in Canada by Microids, Socal, having had a great deal of experience in the highly influential Franco-Belgian comics industry, which created greats like The Adventures of Tintin and Astérix, had previously made the game Amazon, though it was the release of Syberia 3 years later that paved the way for arguably one of the best point-and-click adventure games of modern times. Syberia starts off with a business lawyer named Kate Walker, who finds herself having to travel from the hustles and bustles of New York to the small village of Vallée-de-l'Aisne in the French Alps, in order to secure her company's takeover of the resident toy factory. And while most people would jump at the chance, Kate, it seems, is preoccupied with the business objective and is eager to complete the job as soon as possible in order to return home to the big city. As the player progresses, the story takes certain turns that eventually forces Kate to travel even further to complete the business objective, her boss over in America constantly on her back. Now you may notice from the introduction that the village of Vallée-de-l'Aisne is populated by robots, or what this game refers to as automatons. This is what the town was famous for, though Kate arrives during a time when automaton manufacturing has slowed considerably due to a slump in post-war sales. What's interesting is that these automatons are quasi-clockwork mechanical constructs, rather than electronic creations we would normally associate with humanoid figures. And for many people, when someone mentions the word clockwork, they tend to think of technology from a bygone era. Interestingly though, society does still retain a certain high level of respect for the clockwork industry, thanks mainly to Swiss watch manufacturing. Players get to witness technology being used in wonderful ways in Syberia, where the world of automatons seem to represent something other than as just machines to fulfill everyday human functions, and in spite of the kind of electronic devices we find today being freely available within Syberia's world. The interface is your standard point-and-click affair, though one of the advantages in how it's been implemented on the PC version is that the player no longer requires the use of a keyboard, for everything is accessible via the mouse. Right-clicking the mouse opens up the inventory and enables players to examine or use items as they see fit. As has become standard with many games, Syberia has a built-in cell phone function, and while players have the opportunity to use it whenever they wish, it only really comes into play when Kate receives calls from friends and family, which leads me on to a very important part of the game. From time to time, Kate is called on this phone by various people she knows back home. While many players felt this distraction unnecessary, it serves an important role, to fill the player in on details relating to Kate's life as a lawyer back in the United States.
You know that blue silk top I wanted? Guess how much I got it for?
I don't know, $250? $200?
$140. Just get yourself back here and I'll go down with you.
This is integral to what Socal wanted to portray, because players aren't given any information relating to her background or what her life entailed prior to her arrival in the village. Each caller, whether it be her boyfriend, friend, mother or boss, gradually put into perspective the fast-paced lifestyle she left behind. In this sense, what the game is trying to portray is Kate's gradual surrender to the notion that living a dream, no matter how silly it may appear to be, is far better than a life without meaning. I should also add that Socal did try to implement this cell phone function within his other game, Sinking Island, but as you may well find out, didn't work in the same way as it does here in Syberia, primarily because it didn't quite fit within the overall narrative for that game. The musical tracks within Syberia, though used rather sparingly, are absolutely beautiful, for some of the tunes really do get you in that adventuring mood, the kind of hair standing up on the back of your head type thing. Created by Dmitry Bodyansky, it's quite obvious that a great deal of consideration, time and effort was given to these magnificent orchestral themes that serve to help reinforce the player's sense of adventure and wonderment. The voice acting too is of a fairly high standard, as are the graphics, which back in the early 2000s were amazing for this type of game, and they all help to further reinforce the player's involvement within Syberia's universe. Some of the locations are quite barren, it has to be said, but in the end I felt this was actually a blessing in disguise, due to the fact that it was easier to absorb myself by exploring it, rather than having to listen to the endless drivel of NPCs. I do have to apologise for this video starting off very somber. Don't let this dissuade you, as it does have its moments scattered throughout.
Oscar, see you later, alligator.
Now, I've been very careful to try and convey what the series means to Nuri and I without giving too much away, and even though the video hasn't followed the structure of a typical review, this was because there's only so much that can be said about the mechanics of a point-and-click adventure game. However, where things differ with Syberia is where the narrative and script is concerned, because it's easily comparable to any novel in terms of its scope, as well as what the material evokes within the player.
You clam-brained blubberbag! Wait till I catch you!
We've all heard the argument of whether video games constitute some form of art, and when I say art, I don't necessarily mean relating purely to the aesthetics, but rather more from an intellectual sense, or the kind of feelings we conjure up within ourselves after a good read. Well, I've got to admit that the Syberia series goes some way in assuaging those fears, for like any great novel, its brilliance lies in the many interpretations the player may take away. Benra Sokal had an overall view of a coherent world that he had originally envisioned with his previous video game Amazon, but whose mantle would later be taken up by the Syberia series. What's more profound is that you may come to appreciate the wider scope of Sokal's vision, as you realise that Kate's journey within Syberia I and II is actually just one fairy tale within his overall collection of stories that includes that of Hans and Anna, and even of Amazon itself, but which you will eventually piece together to form Sokal's overall grand narrative. There is actually a difference between the definition of the word story and of the word narrative, even if the majority of times they are used interchangeably. But this kind of conceptualization is rarely if ever seen within video games, due to developers never being able to guarantee funding for the next episode of their work, as well as for various other reasons. But that a video game can operate on such a level is quite amazing, and there is no doubt that Sokal's comics heritage, an industry that shares a great deal with video games in terms of aesthetic design, has been a major factor in its creation. Not least because Sokal already had experience with being able to think on a much wider scale by envisioning a collection of story accounts in order to create his overall narrative, as opposed to most game designers who are either not as well versed or are not afforded the opportunity to create anything beyond one game at a time. Indeed, I think the greatest achievement within Syberia lies with its underlying messages that Sokal has been able to convey, something which is all the easier for us to comprehend thanks to his intelligent use of automatons as anachronisms. In Syberia, Sokal successfully merged classical Victorian images of our past, that itself derives from a nostalgic Victorian generation of authors like Jules Verne, within a framework of our modern day lives, both in terms of the fact that the heroine is a female, which during the Victorian period was a very difficult time for women when suffragettes would routinely risk their lives in order to win the right to vote, as well as the reasoning for Kate being there in the first place, as a lapdog for some money-hungry business suits over in New York wanting to close a multi-million-dollar deal. This is actually one of the most prominent parts of the whole game, because by combining such an unlikely scenario of what is essentially our future relationship with intelligent machines, but within the context of those machines being comprised of our clockwork past, it enables the player to get to grips with the underlying messages hidden within the game, and that is to change not only our perceptions but also our preconceptions about technology that have helped us throughout the ages and whose original purpose and original functions we should never lose sight of.
We've got to go home. We're late. Very late. Anna, over there. What do you mean, over there? Please, Hans, we've got to go. It's a secret. You've got to swear. Okay. I, Anna Vorarlberg, swear to my brother Hans to never ever mention this to anyone.
It's right there. You see? But it's dark in there. Don't worry, I took a lantern. From the factory. Girls, honestly.
You won't look so clever when Father notices you've stolen one of his lanterns. Oh, I'm all covered in mud because of you.
Look, Anna. Look.
For weeks, my brother lay in a coma, hanging between life and death. And then one morning he opened his eyes, but I knew he would never be the same again. We never did return to the cave, and to this day, I have never ever betrayed our secret.
To put this into perspective, the game should make you realise that even though these automatons are seemingly from a bygone age, it highlights our reliance on similar machines in this day and age. As the village of Valladolid through to the university city of Barkstadt is reliant upon these automatons, so too is modern society dependent on cell phones and computers.
Hell, what is going through that kid's head?
And yet what SoCal has actually done is to contrast the relationship of these different technologies not only within the very same setting, but by comparing the effect of the different circumstances of their use. The first being the connotations attached to the use of our own modern technology, the second being the innocent use of automatons for Hans and Anna, and the third being the potential for even that most innocent of intentions for technology to eventually become distorted. As an example of this, SoCal subtly compares Hans and Anna's reasoning behind the use of automatons as an extension of their emotional experience, with that of, for instance, Kate's use of her cell phone for the comparatively meaningless task of contact with friends and business colleagues back home. But he also added into the equation the potential for even Hans and Anna's innocent use of these automatons to become distorted, as demonstrated not only in their use by Stalin and the Soviets, but in Kate's firm wanting to get their hands on the toy factory for their own nefarious needs.
What do you think you're doing, Kate? I wanted updates. I wanted results.
Certainly, Mr. Morrison. We all do. Down on the ground, we're doing all we can, but there's no new developments.
Kate, I don't think you understand the urgency of this situation. Universal toys are on my back and digging in. I can't hold them off much longer.
With this in mind, you eventually realise that thanks to SoCal's experience as a comic book author, what he's created is one of the most intelligent scripts ever created for a video game. For I felt that what SoCal was also trying to portray was that Kate's law firm, like the unstoppable encroachment of globalization, should never be able to get their hands on that last bastion of hope and humanity. And I like to think that the player, like Kate, will feel compelled enough to do the same. But I think the way in which he went about portraying this stark realization is remarkable, in that the world he envisioned is not so very different from our own, and that perhaps our over-reliance on them, on any technology in general, does not come without its consequences. You may believe Kate does certain things for another reason, which is why this video hasn't really specified too much about the actual game, rather more on our own interpretations. But while the Syberia series may appear at first, as with most other games, to leave little in the way of the imagination, it does, I hope, eventually allow you to conclude that a great proportion of the enjoyment actually derives from within your own mind, as with any great literary work. The fact that the game draws on the mysterious region of Syberia in northern Russia and the woolly mammoths only serve to reinforce the extent to which this game magically transports the player to another world. A world in which only then do we realise that how we live our lives and use modern technology actually inhibits our dreams and emotions rather than as tools to help fulfill them.
Listen to me, Kate. Universal Toys is one of our biggest clients, and I don't care how weird that town is. Get the picture!
If you have 5 minutes to sit and talk, I could tell you a thing or two about the olden days.
I am sorry. I really am in a hurry.
That's it, I'm tired. I couldn't give Jack for your namby-pamby clues. I want the girl, you hear me?